The Doctor. In the TARDIS. Next stop, everywhere.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who podcast. I'm Charles Skaggs, back in the TARDIS once again, not with Karen, not with Jesse, but with a very special guest companion this week. Welcome, everybody, to Next Stop Everywhere, Lee Leonard.
Hello, Charles. How are you?
I'm great, Lee. Thank you for filling in. This is awesome. I can't wait to talk to a new person about Doctor Who, especially Jon Pertwee Doctor Who. This is going to be great.
Yes, anytime. Anytime I can help Karen out, especially.
Yeah.
I hope she's doing well.
Yeah, well, we do too. Kind of give everybody a quick update on Karen. For those of you who may not be aware, she has MS, and which is a horrible condition. And so obviously our thoughts are always with her. But she's still having some problems with a kind of ringing in her ear, a buzzing in her ear. And until she gets that worked out, obviously she's going to be kind of unable to record because that kind of obviously it throws her off. But hopefully those that at least will get under control, and all of our best wishes are with Karen, as always.
Yes.
All right. So as for Jesse, Jesse's just being kind of a bum, and no, I'm kidding. He's taking care of his wife Linda, who's having her own medical issues right now. So Jesse, our thoughts are with you and Linda, and he's just kind of dialing things back, but he's going to be with us again shortly. So stay tuned because he's coming back. Don't worry. He's not going anywhere. But this week, here for episode 132, Lee and I are going to talk Inferno.
Yes.
Yes. Lee, this was a suggestion of Lee's, and I thought it was an excellent suggestion. And apparently Lee's really enthusiastic about talking about this one because this was his first suggestion right out of the box.
You know, I went through the list of episodes that you guys had done, and I saw no Pertwee, and I was shocked.
Yeah. So we've actually done some Pertwee. We've actually done
did you?
Yeah, we've done Spearhead from Space. We've done Planet of the Spiders.
Oh.
And I want to think we've done another one besides that. There's one more. I'm kind of drawing a blank, but I'm pretty sure we did another one as well. And I've also pitched Jesse Terror of the Autons. So hopefully
That's a good one.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll do that. So I know what we did. It was Sarah Jane's first adventure, The Time Monster.
Okay, Time Monster.
So we've done a few, not as many as I would like because obviously I love talking classic Doctor Who. But we've done a few, so kind of dig back through our archives, and you'll find our Jon Pertwee episodes.
Will do.
But this time, this is a really good one. Just finished rewatching this one. I've watched this one several times over the years, and this is Inferno, written by Don Houghton, and a really good script actually by Don, directed by Douglas Camfield and Barry Letts. And this was the fourth and final serial of season 7 from 1970. So this is the last story of Jon Pertwee's first season as the Third Doctor. And it also features Caroline John as Elizabeth Shaw, but sadly this is her last regular episode. She does turn up again in a cameo in The Five Doctors back in 1983. But as far as her regular Liz character, this is the last time we see her on Doctor Who. So
very sad.
Yeah, it is very sad because I thought she had kind of a little potential, but she gets written out rather quickly and is replaced by Joe Grant, the companion of Jon Pertwee's second season and onward. But we also have Nicholas Courtney as the Brigadier and also the Brigade Leader, the alternate universe version with, the eye patch, evil eye patch wearing Brigadier, and also John Levene as Sergeant John Benton. So I know Benton doesn't normally have a first name, but I think fans over the years have kind of unofficially given him the first name John as a nod to the actor John Levene. So I refer to him as Sergeant John Benton because, damn it, Benton deserves a first name.
Yeah, I always thought his name was John.
Yeah, so they've never officially confirmed that, as far as I know, on the show, but unofficially, I think everybody kind of just generally considers that. So, but otherwise, before we get into everything, I want to talk about Lee's as a Doctor Who fan first. I kind of jump things around here, so I apologize for that. But so Lee, I want to get your get an idea of your Doctor Who background. So when did you kind of start watching Doctor Who, and the usual questions that follow: favorite Doctor, favorite run, favorite episodes, etc., etc.
Well, I guess this was probably back in maybe 1981, 82. I'm a little bit younger than you guys, so this was. I was at my aunt's house. I very distinctly remember this. I was about 6 or 7 years old, and she had cable TV, which we didn't have, and so I was just fascinated by hitting those buttons on the. They used to have this big box that you put on your coffee table, and it had all the channels attached to a button, and I was just like flipping through them, and I'm like, "What is this?" And there's this guy with this big long scarf and the big poofy hair and the crazy smile.
Yep.
And I was just like, wow, this is really weird. On to something else. Where's the cartoons? so anyway, that's the last that I had given any attention to Doctor Who until late 2009.
Okay.
My ex was like, hey, you got to check out this Doctor Who. And I was like, oh, that silly show, I'm not into that. And she forced me to watch The Christmas Invasion.
Good.
And
that's a good jumping on point.
Yeah, no, and other than the the corny CG and the spinning Christmas tree,
right?
I was intrigued. So on my own, I decided, well, I'm gonna start at the new era, in 2005. Yep. So I watched Rose, and man, I was hooked, and the obsession began.
Excellent.
Started listening to podcasts, and then eventually actually started listening to one for The Killing done by Rob Southgate and his wife, whose name's escaping me. But Martha, yes. I really love that show, and I was like, well, does Southgate Media have anything Doctor Who related?
Well,
and I found you guys.
Oh, excellent. Well, I'm glad you did, and I hope you like our show.
Thank you.
You obviously liked it enough to at least co-host. So, but does this? I guess my question now is Eccleston your favorite Doctor, or is David Tennant?
Man, that is tough. That is really tough.
Or do you kind of share them both?
In a way I do. But even though Tennant was my first and may even be my favorite, I have to say that Christopher Eccleston is my Doctor.
Right. Because that was the probably the first Doctor you watched the run all the way through.
Right. I learned so much about the history of the show and the series while watching that first season.
Yep. That kind of seems to be the trend, because I started watching with the last couple of Tom Bakers. I think I've talked about this. But my first run all the way through was Peter Davison. So Peter Davison became my Doctor.
Right.
And so I kind of think it's like that first Doctor that you watch the run, the entire era. And then because you kind of get a beginning and end, middle and an end. You get closure, so it kind of like cements that into your brain.
Right, right.
And somehow, and you imprint on that Doctor a bit. So that makes perfect sense to me. All right. So let's get into our Inferno discussion a little bit. First thing I want to do, I kind of did a little background on the overview. I did want to kind of mention really quickly, and I don't know if you're familiar with this, Lee, but apparently when Don Houghton was writing the story, apparently he was inspired by real-life events of this top-secret project that apparently they actually tried to drill into the Earth's crust.
Yes.
And then they completely shut this project down and hushed it. And apparently that was the inspiration for Inferno. So
Yeah.
isn't that freaky?
It's crazy. It was another one of those Cold War
Yeah.
stories. You know, it was the U.S. and Russia. The Soviets were trying to drill to the core. The U.S. was trying to drill through the ocean
Right.
into the core, and no one would give Douglas Camfield any explanation as to why they stopped. And so he was just like, "Well, then I need to dig into this," and he wrote a story about it. Pretty
Yeah.
cool.
So yeah, that is very cool. And I kind of want to know more about the real life Inferno.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
And what went on, and was there any like really kind of hairy primords
Yeah. Or Silurians maybe.
or Silurians? Yeah, good. Yeah, they're down there too. So yeah, they're down there, and that's another episode I need to talk about because the Silurians is a really good story. But some guest cast, notable guest cast in this episode or this story, I should say. First, Olaf Pooley as the rather driven, to put it mildly, Professor Stallman. He's notable. He's been in some interesting projects. He was actually in an episode of MacGyver back in 1985, believe it or not, and he played a character, a cleric, in the Star Trek Voyager episode Blink of an Eye, which I thought was rather interesting. Christopher Benjamin, of course, very major figure in Doctor Who history because in addition to playing Sir Keith Gold that he plays here, he's notable for playing the rather exuberant and fun character named Henry Gordon Jago in The Talons of Wang Chiang, the Tom Baker Fourth Doctor episode, and he's reprised Henry Gordon Jago in a series of Jago and Lightfoot audio adventures for Big Finish. And recently, he's played Colonel Hugh in the David Tennant era story, The Unicorn and the Wasp.
Oh, right.
So that's the same guy. So like all the way back to this story, back in 1970, all the way through to the David Tennant era. So he's got some history, and he's also been in episodes of other British TV series like The Prisoner, The Avengers, and so pretty cool actor, pretty good character actor in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And does a great job here. Sheila Dunn, who plays Petra Williams, she's been in a couple of Doctor Who episodes prior to this. She played a character named Blossom Lefavre, and she was in The Daleks' Master Plan, which was a William Hartnell era story. And then she had probably a quick cameo as a phone operator in the Patrick Troughton story, The Invasion.
Well, it was Douglas Camfield's wife, so...
Yeah, exactly. So
there you go.
Yep. So, hey, hooray for nepotism, right? And but yeah, so she's got Doctors 1, 2, and 3 under her belt. Derek Newark, who played Greg Sutton, the former oil rig guy, he was actually in the very first Doctor Who story, in An Earthly Child. He played one of the cavemen named Za. So he goes back to the actual first Doctor Who story. And he's also been in episodes of The Avengers and The Saint. And so I thought that was kind of notable.
Yeah, and he actually got to be in the episode with the original console for the very first time, and the last time you'll see the original console.
Really?
In Inferno, yeah. That was the last time you see the original console.
That's right, because it kind of gets replaced. Yep, from this point on.
And it looks pretty beat up in this episode,
yeah,
too.
it does. It does. It kind of was on its last legs. You're absolutely right. Walter Randall played Harry Slocum, and he was in... he played a character named Tonila in William Hartnell story named The Aztecs, which is a rather good one. El Akir in The Crusade. He played Hyksos in The Daleks' Master Plan. And he played a guard captain in Jon Pertwee's final story, Planet of the Spiders. So he kind of he was part of the early Pertwee and then closed it out, which I thought was interesting. So that's kind of like our notable guest cast this time. So I want to get into that. Otherwise, let's get into our main topics. And the first topic I want to talk about obviously the Third Doctor, because we're going to get into talk about the Jon Pertwee era a little bit. And I want to talk about the Third Doctor's obsession with escaping Earth because of his exile. So, Lee, what did you think about the Third Doctor being so driven? Probably he kind of has his own little obsession, like
Yeah,
kind of like Stallman here, but he seems to be like, well, I know everything's kind of going to hell, but hey, what about hooking me up with some power so I can kind of use the TARDIS and get off this rock.
yeah. Throughout the whole all 7 episodes, he's constantly veering off and saying, "Well, I've got better things to do," and he's like, "Off to my console." But at this point in time, he really hadn't fully accepted his place in UNIT.
Right.
He
Especially in this first season.
Yeah, definitely. And you can still feel the animosity between the Doctor and the Brigadier. I mean, they're friends, but, they still bicker back and forth.
They haven't gotten clicked into their relationship yet.
No. And his relationship, I think, with Liz, why am I forgetting her last name? Liz Shaw. Yeah, his relationship with Liz Shaw, I think, was good. And she was great with him. But I think when they brought on Joe, she kind of softened him up a bit, I think, and once you see season 8, he starts to come around and it starts to fit in a little bit better.
Yeah, because Liz Shaw was a scientist, so essentially it was kind of like a scientist being paired with a scientist.
Right.
And Joe, to put it delicately, wasn't a scientist, so it kind of gave Jon Pertwee the more like, oh, well, hey, I can explain this to the audience and look all smart and clever in the process.
Right.
Yeah,
but I'll tell you that if you're going to be stranded on Earth, getting Bessie is a nice consolation prize.
Exactly.
I love that car.
Yeah, you have to love that car. It's such a sweet ride. Nice little jalopy driving around. And I kind of wonder, though, did Bessie make it back from that parallel dimension?
Yeah, and and the funny things is that when that TARDIS console dematerializes, it takes Bessie, but it doesn't take anything else.
Right. It's just like, there's nothing. I mean, there was all this stuff around, and apparently took, because maybe the Doctor put some Gallifreyan technology in Bessie or something, and then they were kind of linked it to the console, perhaps.
Right.
So maybe that could kind of explain it if you want to kind of figure out a little loophole in the story. But
that's my headcanon.
There you go. Yes.
Can't blame him.
No, that's perfect. But yeah, the Doctor is just really obsessed with this, and he kind of gets a little bit, like I said, like Stallman. He's taking it, kind of takes advantage of it a little bit of the process. You talked about how he was kind of butting heads with the Brigadier, and then when he kind of gets shunted to the parallel universe, he's very thrown by this. Like, this is, it almost feels like this is his first real experience with a parallel dimension. Sure,
you never see it happen before.
Right, at least on the show. So
right.
Maybe another novels or audio adventures or what have you. But so far, this seems like this is his first experience. So his whole perceptions of the Brigadier, Liz, and even Sergeant Benton are kind of thrown. And what did you think about his initial confusion by that whole thing, about trying to kind of come to terms with the fact that he was on a parallel Earth and that it wasn't just everybody else being strange, it was actually him? Yeah,
and you kind of wonder if he had ever realized that this was even possible, because he seemed to learn a lot during this episode. That by the time he gets back, he makes a comment about free will.
Right.
He sees that Christopher Benjamin's character, Sir Keith.
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm saying Keith David, but
that's okay. I get it.
that he's not dead in his world, and so he thinks there's something to that maybe free will isn't predetermined, and so I think it was a learning experience for him at this point, and it could have changed him going forward.
Yeah, maybe this is kind of like maybe this experience kind of settled him a little bit, on at least on the notion that, oh, I got to get out of here, however possible.
Right.
And so, because obviously, when the next season comes around, season 8, he's not nearly as focused on escaping. He's more settled in at that point.
Yeah, he's focused on the master.
Exactly. So yeah, when the master shows up, and then so yeah, maybe escaping Earth isn't so much of a priority. So maybe it's kind of like a combination of both things then, that kind of change his outlook a little bit, and maybe he kind of realized that, well, hey, maybe I kind of screwed up. Although, of course, being the Doctor, he's not going to apologize for his behavior.
Sure.
And,
no.
Kind of disappearing and leaving everybody in the lurch when all this is going on.
Yeah, and he got lucky with the extra time in his world.
Yeah, it's like of all the potential parallel universes, he just happens to have come across the one that just is like maybe 15 minutes into the future, and then he could come back and change things just in the nick of time to save the day on the regular Earth, the prime Earth. Deus
Ex Machina.
Exactly. It's like, oh, that's funny how that kind of worked out. It worked out pretty well. Okay, anything else about Jon Pertwee you want to talk about? Or Jon Pertwee's third Doctor?
Oh, I don't know. I love him so much. I love his costume.
Yeah.
I don't know. No, I think that's about it for,
okay.
For
all right.
him.
Obviously, we should probably talk about. He does kind of butt heads with Stallman too, and of course, being the Doctor, anytime he comes across any authority figures that are troublesome, the Doctor just has to get his nose into it and kind of butt heads with them.
Yeah, and how many times does he call him a nitwit?
I know, that's his.
I love that.
That was great. I love that, and delivering it as only Jon Pertwee can.
Oh yes.
He's so good. All right, let's move on to our second topic then. Let's talk about the Brigadier, Liz, and Sergeant Benton, and also their alternates. So I also want to talk about the brigade leader, Elizabeth Shaw, not Liz, and the other Benton. He had another title too, but that kind of escapes me at the moment. But
yeah, it was a mouthful, as the Doctor said.
Yeah, exactly.
His title.
So to kind of use Star Trek terms, essentially, the alternate versions are the kind of mirror universe versions of the Brigadier, Liz, and Benton. Here, they're that kind of like this alternate Earth seems to be more of a fascist Earth, and that very authoritarian, and so I kind of want to get your thoughts on our regular unit support team, and also on their alternate versions. What do you think of these characters in this story?
Oh, I mean, that's my favorite part of the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Really, you could tell that they were having so much fun doing those versions of their characters, especially the Brigadier. I mean, he's just got that gleam in his eye.
He didn't have to wear that cheesy fake mustache all the
time. Yeah. And he's one of the few characters that if you put a mustache on him, usually they're the bad guy, right? And
right.
You take the mustache off of him, and for some reason he looks more sinister.
But he didn't have the goatee. He didn't have the evil goatee.
No,
he just had the mustache. He just had the mustache.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But he was rocking that. His brigade leader was rocking that sweet eye patch, that sweet Nick Fury eye patch.
Oh yeah. And, that's why I call it Eye Patch World.
Exactly. That's good.
It's funny. It's like you think about the butterfly effect, I guess. That you have to imagine that something happened in this parallel universe to set it off on this course. And I know they mentioned that Britain became a republic in 1943.
Right.
And so my headcanon says, maybe England switched sides in World War II, killed off the royal family.
Right.
And here we go,
That's a really good theory because, maybe because after the Blitz, maybe they were just kind of decide, well, okay, we surrender,
Right.
and
Right.
go ahead and take over. So,
Yeah.
or is it there's something? I kind of would like to know more about how this world came about, but
Absolutely.
but
There needs to be
and
like a Big Finish audio or
yeah,
a book or something like
or
that.
at least maybe, hey, here's an idea, maybe a return to that world on
Yes.
on
Yes.
the TV series.
I would love that.
That would
You
be
know, somebody. I mean, the first two episodes, right? The first, Spearhead in Space,
yeah,
and then this Doctor Who and the Silurians were remade, pretty much remade, in my opinion. Rose and Cold Blood,
yeah, yeah,
that one.
yeah.
They should totally go back to this one. I would love it. And as a prequel, I guess maybe I don't know about redo it so to speak, but just
Well, you have to. Yeah, it almost would have to be a prequel because as the events of Inferno, essentially the Earth, to use a Christopher Eccleston term, gets roasted, and as a result ends up just a lot of people, everybody we believe, as far as we know, dies. So you'd almost have to to explain things, how it came to be. I would think a prequel would be the way to go.
sure. And you'd have to wonder if maybe the events of that episode has affected the Doctor even to now. I mean, granted, the Doctor's seen the Time War,
Right.
but it would be great to have a story where maybe she goes back and possibly has a chance to change things.
Yeah.
And struggles with that.
All right. So get to it, writers. Come on. Let's.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to point out about this, and I don't know if you noticed it, but I definitely noticed it the second time around that I watched this. I think this was my third time watching this.
Okay.
There's no pre-recorded music at all
No.
for this whole story. It's just drilling, just constant, incessant drilling, and it really adds to the dread, which was, like, I think, a lucky chance by them, because I guess Douglas Canfield and Dudley Simpson didn't quite get along too well.
Right.
So he wanted him nowhere near the set. So instead, we get this great ominous feeling.
Yeah. It does kind of set the tone, and also makes that alternate world seem that much more, maybe not in a noticeable way, but in a kind of subconscious way.
Right.
Just like something's not right here.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't our usual type of incidental music.
Yeah.
And but yeah, that's a great observation, Lee. I like that a lot. Very insightful. We find out that the brigadier, the brigade leader. It's so easy to get them confused. They look alike. So the brigade leader, interestingly, he comes off as this big tough guy, and by the end of the story, he's exposed as a bit of a coward.
Oh yeah. Quite a bit.
Like there's this line where, like, well, you take away all your 10 soldiers and look, see what kind of man you really are. And so, what did you think of the brigadier in this alternate Earth as a bit of a coward?
Well, I was thinking that as I was watching this, there is still a bit of the core personality of each character.
Right.
In this, it is a mirror universe. Of course, you're going to have that.
Yeah.
But the Brigadier was still the Brigadier if he hadn't been, in my opinion, softened by the Doctor, by who knows what experiences he's lived up to that point.
Right.
But yeah, in any situation, you have to wonder, could you be exposed as a coward, given the right circumstances? And anybody could be affected by those circumstances.
Right. It all depends on the experiences leading up to that moment.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it would be like like if the brigade leader had a different set of experiences, obviously, than the regular brigadier, then he would have turned out differently.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the only one that seemed a little bit over the top to me was Benton.
Yeah.
Because Benton is such an easygoing guy,
right.
in the Doctor's world. But here, he was just serious and
like very snap to.
Yeah.
And but hey, he gets what's coming to him. He becomes a Primord.
Yes, he
eventually.
does.
So we get to see kind of like if you ever wanted to see Sergeant Benton as Chewbacca, here you go. This is the story for you. Um, he's in dire need of a trim.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's kind of funny, and I have to think because especially I know this is kind of like early in the unit run, but I got to think that the actors really enjoyed the chance to play different versions of themselves.
Oh, absolutely. And from what I understand, John Levene was a little bit terrified by his role in this because uh, the soldiers that were there in that
Yeah.
parallel universe, they were, and you've probably heard this, and maybe watched the extras, but they were all, a lot of them were actual soldiers, and he had no idea what he was doing. So every time he'd have to call them to attention
Right.
or yell at them, they would laugh at him and show him, the proper way. And from what he says, he got it eventually.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I kind of watched this while I was watching the episode, and regular Benton, when he's saluting, he doesn't quite do it real crisp and confident.
No.
He just kind of throws up his hand a little bit with the fingers almost exposed, they're not tight together.
Right.
So obviously John Levene isn't as doesn't have that military background, and it kind of shows. But he does good enough to get the story moving. You don't really care about that.
Right.
But it was just something I kind of noticed. Is like, well, he's not quite military form, is
Yeah.
he? And,
He's a heck of a golfer, from what I hear. Though.
oh, he does. I didn't know that. I wonder what his handicap is.
There's some interesting stories about John Levene.
I'm sure he seems like a very interesting guy to get to
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
But and Liz and playing Elizabeth Shaw, I thought was interesting because Elizabeth Shaw in the alternate universe, the parallel universe, she's much more authoritative than the regular Liz, because Liz is a scientist, but Elizabeth is a military officer. She didn't go down that science road. They talked about her, like the doctor talks to her a little bit and asks her, well, didn't you have an interest in science at one point?
She studied physics in college.
Yeah, but apparently that's as far as it went.
Right.
And she never went down that road. So that's basically her road not taken. So she went to this militaristic career path. And so she essentially is giving the doctor a hard time, but she seems to be the first one to kind of come around. And,
Yes.
and kind of like, look, we're kind of screwed here. At least he has a chance to go off and save some people. So it seems, at least in this alternate universe, at least unlike the Brigadier, or Brigade Leader, excuse me, Elizabeth at least has a little bit of the Liz that we know in her.
Right.
Would you say
Yeah.
so?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you don't see it until 2-3/4 of the way through, but
Right.
yeah, I mean, she never took any BS from the doctor.
No, and it kind of like that. And then it was kind of interesting because at the end of the episode, back in the regular universe, you kind of see the regular Liz giving the Brigadier some lip service.
Right.
After he kind of like he gets in a little snippy with the doctor, and the doctor disappears. Now, unknown to him, he ends up on a rubbish tip, like 300 yards away or whatever. And so Liz is giving him grief, like, look what you did, and now he's gone. And Brigadier's like, well, I don't like your tone, Miss Shaw. And she's like, counters back, I don't like your tone either. Which especially for just 1970, that was pretty.
Oh yeah.
Pretty stand-up-ish, and
It was a shame she had to leave.
yeah. I hate to think though, like that was the Brigadier said, okay, we can't have that. We got to transfer her out of here.
Yeah, but he would never do that.
Or did he?
Well,
No.
that's a good point. Good point.
It's like maybe that was the reason Liz left, because she got up in the Brigadier's grill and didn't want to. And just got a little snippy with him. But I like seeing that side of Liz, is my point. I really like that. I wish we could have seen more of that.
Yeah, or more of her in general.
Yeah. At least for a couple more stories, I think would have been great. All right. Anything else about these characters before we move on?
No, no, other than I love them.
All right.
Great.
Last topic. Stallman and the Primords. So here's your chance to talk about Professor Stallman because, wow, what a lovely, charming person he is.
Oh yeah.
And ultimately he and others end up becoming Primords in, well, others become Primords mostly in the alternate universe, but in both universes, Stallman decides to stick his hand in some goo from underneath the earth and ultimately smears it all over his face because, ooh, it just feels so good against his skin. And so I want to get your thoughts on Stallman and everybody butting heads with Stallman. So this is probably, anything you want, like Petra or Greg or any of the others, or Sir Keith. Just butting heads with this guy. So what do you think of Stallman and everybody else just like exasperated with his, stubbornness?
Oh, this guy drove me crazy.
Yeah.
But he was
a good villain.
Oh, absolutely great villain. Acted very well. Mm-hmm. Apparently he was a bit I don't know about standoffish, but aloof.
Yeah.
In person. So he really fit the role quite well. But I didn't, he's one of the few characters that didn't really change between universes.
Yeah, he was a dick in both universes.
Yeah, totally. Well, minus the goatee and
right.
And he got those cool glasses.
Yep. And those nice white gloves.
Oh yes. Not as nice as the doctors, but he was a schmuck in both worlds, right. and clearly an alcoholic in both realities.
Right.
Because his liver is acting up in both
exactly.
of those. Yeah.
I caught that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, as far as the Primords went, I didn't love the Primords storyline. Mm-hmm. And it was clearly filler. I know they had four episodes worth of story in the beginning, and in the original there was no alternate universe. There was no Primords. So when they finally brought it together at the end, they added this extra bit with the alternate universe, which in my opinion turned out to be the best part.
Right.
But the silly costumes, the werewolf makeup really threw me off.
With the like teeth from the novelty shop down the road.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That
was my one negative for this, but actually on my
you gotta have something for the kids.
Yeah, you do. And on that third watching it started to come around, not necessarily the makeup and the way they looked, but just the story aspect of it and how there was this ooze, that was down there, this secret that was that had the potential to, if it spread, destroy humanity.
Right.
It
almost did kind of see like the Primords were just kind of like an afterthought. That or that they were incidental. They weren't the main villain so much. It was just Stallman and his just stubbornness and his obsession, his fanatical obsession of like, I gotta penetrate the Earth's crust. We have to do this, and everybody's just like, well, you've been working on this for years. Why don't you just take it a little slower? No, we have to do it now.
Yeah.
And everybody's just get out of my way. You're stop being, causing trouble and impeding progress.
Yeah.
But it almost seemed like, once he was infected, like that this force was calling to him.
Right.
And kind of controlling him. So maybe it just the force, he was already driven, but once he was infected, it just kicked into overdrive, I think.
It did, but it also distracted him.
Yeah.
Quite a bit, which might have been to the doctor's benefit in the end.
Right, yeah, because he probably would have accomplished goals maybe a little sooner had he been more focused.
Right. I wish, and that's another thing about this story that I wish they could have explained more, is that goo.
Yeah.
What it is, what it's really doing. Another story about that would be nice.
Yeah, again, that's like, it's right there for a prequel, guys. Come on.
Yeah.
Somebody, really needs to follow up on this because there's some story potential there, I think.
How many 7-episode stories do you get that just feel like they're ratcheted up and just going full bore the whole time? And this one's
exactly.
one of them.
Yeah, exactly. Because normally, like this is essentially like two classic era stories almost long.
Yeah,
Because normally most of them are by and large four-parters,
4 to 6.
and
Yeah,
this is a seven-parter.
yeah,
And but the pacing is just really good, and the conflict is always going on. Like somebody's always butting heads with somebody in this story, and so like uh, Stallman with any character, or the Doctor with the Brigadier, or even occasionally Greg with Petra, and so it kind of it keeps things moving.
and the Doctor only gets captured and put in jail twice. Once when he's interrogated, and the other when he's in that cell with the Primord. Yeah. But in most
that's pretty low for the classic Doctor Who.
Yeah, in most Doctor Who, early Doctor Who, you're captured and escaped like I don't know 6, 7 times.
Well, I remember Doctor Who magazine used to keep it like a running counter of the number of times the Doctor was incarcerated, or or somebody was incarcerated.
Right.
Like they had a little counter as they were going through their like a rewatch, and they sadly never finished that rewatch because I would have liked to seen the final number with that. But
yeah.
But Stallman, the one thing that frustrates me so much about Stallman in this story is that for all the the posturing that Sir Keith does, and the Doctor and the Brigadier and Greg and Petra, nobody takes Stallman and just locks him in a room somewhere.
Yeah, just overpowers him.
Yeah, just like you have all these unit guys. You've got Sir Keith. He's and he kept going, well, I don't have the authority.
Yeah, and the Brigadier just says, he is in charge.
Yeah, he's like, he's in charge, but this thing is like a complete public hazard. And you would think that would be enough to shut the thing down and lock him in a room somewhere for public safety concerns. Or at least, the staff and the employees, their well-being.
Yeah. Well, if they did that, then the story would have been over.
I get that. I get that. Now, it would have been one thing if they had locked him up and he would have escaped.
Sure.
And still tried to do his thing. But
or if he became
it frustrates me as a writer. It's just like, why didn't you at least lock him? At least attempt to get him physically removed from control.
Sure, because he could have become a Primord and bent the bars. Or,
something like that. Or just because he was infected, that somehow he gets out. They don't know he's infected, and he gets out of whatever room he's in, and keeps pushing things forward unknown to them. I thought, but it just frustrates me because throughout most of the story, there's we just can't. He's in charge, and we're just supposed to British stiff upper lip, and we're like, okay, no, we're good, but sadly that didn't happen. But finally it did. Only it's there was that bit where Sir Keith goes at the end. He goes we need proof, and then all of a sudden the door opens, and here's Stallman in full Primord mode, and it's there's your proof. Can we get rid of him now? So just a little niggling thing that bugged me. All right. Anything else about Stallman and the Primords?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Now let's move on. Favorite lines of the story. Did you happen to write down any favorite quotes from the story that you liked?
I wrote down 2.
There's some good lines in this story.
And I knew that you would probably pick the same one as me.
Well, why don't you go ahead first then?
All right. Well, my favorite quote is when the Doctor says, I don't exist in your world, and the Brigadier says, then you won't feel the bullets when we shoot you.
That's a great line.
That was my favorite.
I love that line. That's a good one. Let's see. One of the lines I liked. It's kind of this over the top line, but I kind of liked it from the Doctor. He goes, "Listen to that. That's the sound of this planet screaming out its rage."
Yes.
That's a good one.
Yes.
Do you have another one?
I do, yeah. It's when the Doctor's first confronted by the brigade leader and Elizabeth Shaw, when the brigade leader's asking the Doctor his name.
Yeah.
And he says, "Name? You ask me my name after all the years you and I... Well, then I'm beginning to see what's happening here. Might I suggest you just call me the doctor? And the brigade leader says, Doctor? Doctor what? The doctor says, Smith. Dr. John Smith. And I think that's the first time you ever hear him call himself John Smith, in fact.
No, that was in Spearhead from Space.
Oh, was it? Okay,
at
right,
the end,
right.
Because they were asking him his name, and he says Smith,
Okay,
Dr. John Smith. But you're close, you know. That was, I think, the second, I think. But, yeah, that's a good one. I like that one. There's this great one, obviously, between the Doctor and Professor Stallman, where he goes, and you kind of mentioned this earlier, well, I'll tell you something that should be of vital interest to you. Professor Stallman replies, and what's that? The Doctor replies, that you, sir, are a nitwit.
That was going to be my first one, actually.
That's a classic one. Exchange between the Doctor and the brigade leader, where the brigade leader goes, you are giving us a great deal of trouble. And the Doctor replies, I'm delighted to hear that. And the brigade leader says, you'd make things much easier for yourself if you tell us who you are. And the Doctor replies, proper little bureaucrat, aren't you? Can't shoot me unless you filled in all the forms. Is that it? So I'd like that. And then the Doctor, between the Doctor and Greg Sutton, toward the end of the story, where the Doctor's introduces Greg to the TARDIS console, and Greg says, so that's the contraption, is it? The Doctor replies, the console, Mr. Sutton, the console. And Greg replies, well, I thought it'd be a bit more impressive than that. The Doctor counters, what did you expect? Some kind of space rocket with Batman at the controls?
That was actually my second. And I figured I would go with something a little less. I mean, the one with, yeah, I love that.
But I love that.
I absolutely love that.
I had to acknowledge that one. And then last thing I have is the exchange between. Do you have any more? I should ask you that.
No.
Okay. All right. Last one I have is between the Brigadier and Liz. That exchange I was talking about earlier. Liz says, "Now see what you've done." And the Brigadier says, "Well, I didn't know he'd go off like that. The man's so infernally touchy." And Liz says, well, I should be most interested to see how you get along without him, Brigadier. Brigadier replies, may I remind you, Miss Shaw, that you're still a serving member of UNIT? I don't entirely care for your tone.
Not for long.
Liz replies, I don't care much for yours either. No wonder the Doctor cleared off. So I like that.
Now that you say that, it really does make sense that, maybe that's
it's like
part of the reason why she left.
Liz.
Yeah.
That was great. I love that.
And just as a side note, I don't know if you noticed this, but just the I wouldn't call it a relationship, but the interactions between Greg Sutton and
Petra. Yeah.
Oh boy, yeah, he's creeping on her.
He is
pretty hard.
He is. Well, he's like abusing her half the time.
Yeah.
He keeps calling her stupid and all this, and then he's like, hey, baby.
Yeah. Oh, and not appropriate for these days.
No. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this would be definitely a time's up moment.
Absolutely.
For Greg, but for the 70s, he could get away with it a little easier. All right. So, do you have a rating for this episode or this story?
I do have a rating.
What's your rating?
Well, the first one I wrote down, I actually thought of 2 ratings.
Okay.
I mean, they're the same rating, but I have 9 broken microcircuits out of 10, but I thought it would be much more amusing to give it 9 cirrhotic livers out of 10.
Very nice. Very nice. That's very clever. So you really enjoyed this story.
Oh, I love this story.
Yep.
It's probably my favorite Pertwee story.
That's a great
This one and Frontier in Space. That was going to be my other selection.
That's a good one, too.
Yeah.
I think mine's probably it's a toss-up between Spearhead from Space and the 3 Doctors, I think.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, you can't go wrong with the 3 Doctors.
But I love Spearhead. I think that's so good. All right. I give this one just a little bit under you. I give it 8.5 Brigade Leader eye patches. Because I love this story, but it does frustrate me a little bit.
Sure.
For the good reasons, I think. And And but I do love the tension in it, and I think definitely a strong entry in Jon Pertwee's era. I love it a lot. I
Absolutely.
like it a lot. All right, so I know that Lee's been wondering about this, so we're going to go to our reverse the reverse the polarity of the neutron flow segment here, and Lee threw out a couple of suggestions of what it might be. So Lee, do you want to give those suggestions to everybody before I give mine?
Well, before I came on,
Because
I
they
was
were really
thinking,
good. They were really good suggestions.
I was thinking to myself, gosh, what's he going to do? And I was
Yeah.
thinking, well, what would involve drilling? And,
Hmm.
of course, there's a
Right.
lot of drilling, and especially in classic Doctor Who.
Right.
But I thought of the Rebel Flesh two-parter
Right.
with gooey-faced Matt Smith.
Yes.
And then I thought of the fires of Pompeii, because there was this catastrophe that was going to happen,
And that's a really good one.
and the Doctor had to decide.
That kind of plays up the Inferno part of the story.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. And can I save everyone? Can I save anyone? And in this one, he doesn't save anyone.
Yeah.
But granted, it's saving someone from a parallel universe where they'd be bringing them back into the other universe where they might potentially meet a version of themselves, and I could get why that would break the laws of time.
Right.
But it had a similar vibe. So those are my two guesses, but apparently I got it wrong.
No. That's okay. You didn't get it wrong. You just happened to choose something different from me. Okay. Those are great choices. And actually, I kind of like your Fires of Pompeii. I think I might like it better than my suggestion here.
Well, thank you, sir.
All right. But I think because those were really good. So don't discount yourself. That was good. Now, what I chose for the reverse the polarity this time, I kind of went the more obvious route. I played up on the parallel universe angle.
Oh, Rise of the Cybermen.
Rise of the Cybermen, the Age of Steel. You are absolutely correct, sir. So yeah, I went with the fifth and sixth episodes from Series 2 in 2006, where I know a lot of people know the story, so I won't run down the whole thing, but so I'll just kind of do it quickly. So essentially what we have here is a story where the Doctor, Rose, and Mickey are traveling in the TARDIS, the 10th Doctor, David Tennant, and Mickey feels left out, and then all of a sudden the TARDIS gets jolted and comes to a sudden stop. And the Doctor tells them they've fallen out of the time vortex, and the TARDIS power cells are dead. So here we have a TARDIS without power. And the Doctor fears they're trapped in the void. Now this is after the Doctor had Mickey hold down a lever on the TARDIS console and essentially kept them going and going, and to the point where it's kicked them into a parallel universe, as it turns out. They open the doors and to see they're on London, but hey, they go outside and realize that, oh, it's London on a parallel Earth. So again, this is the parallel Earth story. And the Doctor finds a small power cell in the TARDIS that works, so he kind of gives it a little boost with some of his own Artron energy, and starts the cell recharging. Apparently, he didn't get a charger from the local phone store, Best Buy, yeah, exactly, or Target. The cell needs 24 hours to recharge, so it's like, well, hey, we're here, we can't go anywhere, we might as well go exploring, right? So they go exploring, and they find out that most of the world's population has these strange little ear pods going on. And this is actually before, the kind of wireless earphones. So this is kind of like Doctor Who being a little prescient here. Turns out the head of Cybus Industries, John Levene, is essentially trying to upgrade humanity by linking their brains into through these ear pods. And it turns out, yeah, he's been doing experiments on the side and getting homeless people and turning them into cyborgs, which ultimately leads to the revelation that, hey, he's creating the Cybermen. Now, this isn't like the traditional Mondas Cybermen. He's just essentially creating the Cybermen, but on Earth in this parallel universe. So essentially, this was Russell T Davies introducing the Cybermen in a completely different way. And um, so we have this, again, we have this dangerous threat to mankind, kind of like obviously that we have here in Inferno. And ultimately, the Doctor ends up like they kind of ally themselves with Pete Tyler, who is obviously dead on the regular Earth, and Rose, she gets kind of reunited with her father, and in the process, Mickey ends up hooking up with this guy named Jake, who kind of leads the local resistance group, and ultimately, Lumic ends up becoming like the cyber controller, and so they take down him. They save the day. They cause Lumic to plunge to his death, and in this exploding factory. So we have a factory here that explodes. So kind of like Inferno. There's another small connection, and ultimately, they return to the TARDIS. The Doctor plugs in the recharge power cell, revives the TARDIS, and Mickey feels that, well, hey, Rose doesn't need me anymore. I can do some better good here, so I'm going to stay. And he's going to take care of his alternate universe's version of his grandmother, and to kind of help the local resistance group, the Preachers, stop the remaining Cybermen. So, unlike Inferno, things kind of turn out a little better, because, hey, the world doesn't end. But Mickey ends his relationship with Rose, and then the TARDIS dematerializes, goes back to the regular universe, and Mickey and Jake plan to destroy a Cybus Industry factory in Paris. So that's where we leave them. So I know I kind of breezed through that, but hey, it's a two-parter, and we'd be here all day if I went through the whole thing. But if you enjoyed a good parallel universe story, like Inferno, obviously I definitely recommend Rise of the Cybermen, The Age of Steel.
Agreed.
And it's a pretty good story in my opinion as well. So definitely recommend it. Let's see here. So listener feedback. Now we did get a couple of emails about Inferno, so I'll read those really quickly. And first off, we have Holly from Wisconsin, writing in really quickly about Inferno.
Hi, Holly.
Hi, Holly. So, Holly, Lee, Holly. Everybody knows everybody now. So Holly writes in and says, "Hey all, forgot how much I enjoyed this story. Great cast of characters and a bad guy." She says Standall, but I think she means Stallman. Yeah. Isn't much of a scene chewer, which is a good thing. Love the use of the Venusian Aikido. Yeah, we didn't talk about this because we got to see the Doctor using some Venusian Aikido on some soldiers.
That was another thing that was added in after the fact, just as a filler.
Yeah, but obviously it kind of took off and became this kind of Doctor Who legend. This little tiny bit of the Doctor Who mythos. The alternate universe here is very nicely played, and that in the end, the alternates of the Brigadier and Liz Shaw were willing to help out and put Stallman in his place. The pacing was pretty darn good for a 7-part episode, right? It was, wasn't it? And Holly says, "I'll wrap it up here." Holly from Wisconsin. So that's her quick thoughts on Inferno. And then we also have Paul from Australia, who writes in and says, "Hi, Charles and Lee." So Paul,
hey,
Paul giving Lee a shout out prematurely here. He says, Paul says, "This is such an interesting story, one in which we see an alternate reality of Earth, with characters we know, such as the Brigadier and Liz, appearing much different than how we normally see them. I'm still wearing that eye patch in honor of the Brigadier," smiley face. "I love in this episode that the Doctor has just ripped out the console out of the TARDIS. How did he do that?" Well,
very carefully.
Very carefully. I'm kind of thinking that maybe he took it apart piece by piece.
Yeah,
and walked it through the doors.
If you look very carefully, you can see like 2x4s holding the bottom of the console up.
Right. So he kind of I need something to support this here. So yeah. But it is a good question. unless he had enough energy to dematerialize it outside the TARDIS, and then it quit working. I don't know. But that's my possible solutions for that. But he says, while he tinkers with it, trying to make it function properly again so he can flee his exile from Earth. The Primords in this story are very werewolf-looking, aren't they? Yes, they are. Luckily for everyone who doesn't perish, the Doctor works out what's going on. Really enjoyed rewatching these episodes, even though I wouldn't say it's a favorite of mine. It was still fun. I always love episodes with the Unit and the Brigadier in it. Yes, they're always good, aren't they? Brigadier is always great on screen. Best wishes as always, Paul. P.S. So, Charles, are we off to a desert planet with a London bus on it next? Maybe? Question mark, question mark, question mark. So, of course, Paul's setting us up for my next time on Next Stop Everywhere segment. We are going to talk Planet of the Dead, a classic David Tennant story, one of his last bit of specials that aired in 2009. And we're going to talk about this with special guest companion Christine Peruski. Now, you may remember Christine because about a year ago, she joined Jesse and me for a review of the Shakespeare Code. So she's back to talk another David Tennant story, and I'm definitely glad because I had a lot of fun talking with Christine, and I'm so glad she just offered to come back. And so we're going to be talking Planet of the Dead with Lady Christina D'Souza, one of my favorite almost companions, played by Michelle Ryan.
Yeah, I think that was the first HD.
Yes, it was. It was the first HD story on Doctor Who. So it's which is kind of frustrating because, like, well, okay, you couldn't make the previous story, the Next Doctor, an HD story, so you had all the specials in HD. That's that kind of anal retentive part of my personality that drives me nuts. It's like, well, if you're gonna have a break, like, do a clean break and do it. Don't just do one special and then do the rest in HD. Right. But oh well.
What are you going to do?
What are you going to do? It's not like I can have the power to control Doctor Who. So I just have to live with it, just like everybody else. But yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to that story and looking forward to Christine coming back. So if you want to write in and like Holly and Paul did, and drop us a line about what you thought of either Inferno retroactively, or you want to look ahead and let us know what you think of Planet of the Dead. Drop us a line at nextstopeverywheresmg@gmail.com. That's nextstopeverywheresmg. Don't forget the SMG at gmail.com. That's for Southgate Media Group, in case anybody's wondering. And otherwise, you can reach us on the Twitter machine at nextstopsmg. Or on Facebook, Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who podcast. Or you can reach us on the spiffy Instagram that all of the kids are doing these days at Next Stop Everywhere podcast on Instagram. We definitely appreciate that. Otherwise, Lee, anywhere they can reach you on the interwebs that you'd like?
Is this where we do our plugs?
You can do your shameless plugs. Plug away.
All right. Well, I don't really do a whole lot of social media.
Okay.
I'm Lee Leonard75 on Facebook and Instagram. If you want to see, pictures of my kid, pictures of my band, things like that.
Oh, cool. Do you have a do you have a band?
I do have a band. Can I plug that?
Yeah, please do. What's the band's name?
All right. The band's name is Silence Follows. We play in the local Pittsburgh area.
Cool.
You can hear us. We're like a rock alternative, little bit heavy, but
that's all right. That's right up my alley.
All right. You can, we have an EP called Beyond the Flames. It's on iTunes, Amazon Music, SoundCloud, all that stuff.
Cool.
Pretty much anywhere.
Yeah, check that out, everybody.
Yeah, thank you.
No, you're very welcome. You were kind enough to do us a solid, so we try to do a solid back.
Oh man, it was no problem. I love doing this.
Yeah, so everybody check out Lee's album. That'd be awesome. All right. Yeah, otherwise for me, of course, at Charles Skaggs on the Twitter, at Charles Skaggs on the Insta. Not Google Plus anymore because, hey, Google Plus doesn't exist anymore.
R.I.P.
So, yep. Facebook, Charles Skaggs in Hilliard, Ohio, or my blog of geeky things.
Damn good coffee.
And hot.
And hot. Damn good coffee and hot. We're going to talk about all the stuff we talk about here at Next Stop Everywhere, Doctor Who, Torchwood, Sarah Jane Adventures. Also, any kind of comic book, sci-fi news that just piques my interest, and there's a lot to pique. And also news in my other podcasts they do for Southgate Media Group, including, deep breath everybody, Ghost with the Twin Peaks podcast that I do with Zan Sprouse, wife of comic book artist Chris Sprouse, where we talk about all things Twin Peaks, David Lynch, etc., etc. Or Titan Talk, the Titans podcast that I do with Jesse occasionally. And we're going to be starting up our weekly reviews of Doom Patrol on the DC Universe platform. I'm a big Doom Patrol fan from DC Comics Vertigo, written by Grant Morrison. So that's definitely up my wheelhouse. Jesse is not so much of a Doom Patrol fan, but he's going to check it out, and he did like the Doom Patrol episode of Titans. So fingers crossed that he likes the spinoff series as well. And we're going to be reviewing that. So everybody, please check that out, especially if you miss Jesse, because
We miss Jesse.
We always miss Jesse. And otherwise, there's the Fandom Zone podcast to do with Karen Lindsay, but obviously that's gone on indefinite hiatus until Karen again gets her condition under control. So Karen, once again, our thoughts are with you, and we wish you and Jesse's wife Linda a very speedy recovery, and hope everything improves soon. So everybody, thank you so much for listening to us. Lee, I hope you had a good time. I hope you had fun.
Oh, I had a blast. Thank you so much, Charles.
You were great on the podcast. He kept give a little background. He was so nervous and about coming on. He's like, well, I don't know. What if I screw up? And I'm like, dude, relax. You're gonna be fine. You're gonna be awesome.
It's funny. I can get up on stage and play my music in front of anyone, and I'm not nervous at all. But when it comes to doing this, I was a little nervous.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, if I can do it, anybody can do it. I think I've proven that, hopefully. So yeah, don't worry about it. You did a fantastic job, and we'd love to have you back sometime soon.
Thank you, sir. I would love to be back.
Yeah, you're always welcome.
I hope I did
I thought you did a fantastic job.
I hope I did at least as well as Fred. At least somewhat as well as Fred.
Well, Fred is another cat that he's got it. I love Fred. I think Fred's a great guy. So it's kind of tough to top Fred, but everybody enjoyed him when he was on, and I think you're definitely in the ballpark, if not equal.
Oh, thank you.
So yeah, I don't want to play favorites here. So I'm gonna try and be very diplomatic about this, but I thought you did a really good job.
Thank you.
And I definitely think you're on par with Fred. So don't worry. All right. So everybody, anything else, Lee, before we sign off?
No. Thank you, and Karen, I hope you're doing well. I hope you're getting better, and I cannot wait to have you back on the show, even if it means I'm not on the show ever again.
Well, that's very generous of you, but I'm pretty sure if Karen came back, we could find room for you as well. So don't worry. You're not getting out of it that easily. All right. So everybody, thanks again for listening. Come on back for Next Stop Everywhere 133. We're going to talk Planet of the Dead with Christine Peruski. It's going to be fun because it's been a while since I've watched that story, and I really liked it back when I did watch it. And I'm looking forward to a rewatch. So come on back. It's going to be fun. We're going back to the modern era because, hey, Next Stop Everywhere. So we'll see you next time right here. Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who podcast. Goodbye, everybody.